Hey everybody, this is Raul with Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of talking with bassist, producer, and engineer Rob Marshall.
How you doing, Raul?
Doing great, doing great. Rob's coming to us via the wonders of Skype, and you're coming from California, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, San Francisco Bay Area.
Excellent, excellent. And one of the reasons we're talking with Rob and is because he's played an instrumental part playing bass with Silent Pilot. And it's kind of an interesting circumstance, and I'll have him explain it more in depth for you. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about your bass journey. How did you get started playing bass? What were your beginnings?
So I've played music in general my whole life. Parents put me in piano lessons when I was young. Didn't really stick to that. Started playing trumpet in fourth grade. Did that all the way through senior year, and then like my sophomore year of high school, I had a friend who played guitar and had been playing guitar for a while, and asked me if we wanted to play bass. So I went down to the local music shop. I rented a bass, started picking it up, started playing, and pretty much ever since then I've been playing bass.
Gotcha. And after school, any additional training? You jump into just playing with bands, or how did you go about it?
So I took a little bit of private lessons. I have a minor in music from the University of San Francisco. And I played in a lot of different bands. I played in like a main band in high school, but then I also had a friend who was kind of like that I knew from playing trumpet in jazz band that um, sort of like went around and played parties in high school and would ask me like, "Oh, you want to come jam?" It's just going to be kind of informal type of stuff. So I got a lot of opportunities to play a lot of different types of music in a lot of different settings. So, house party here, cafe there, like coffee shops and all these different sort of places. And then my high school band was fortunate enough to be able to make it out of high school and do a little bit of touring, do a couple of records, which was a lot of fun. But as far as like formal training, I would say that it was largely the jazz band that I was in middle school and high school, and then also some private lessons and a little bit of music at the University of San Francisco as well.
Very cool. And how did you end up with playing with Silent Pilot?
So I have known those guys for probably 12-ish, 12 or 13 years. I recorded the singer Anthony and the guitarist Zach, their high school band, when I was in high school. And we just kind of kept in touch throughout that time. And then everybody kind of went off to college and had their own lives and their own bands and their own projects. And then Anthony, I got word that he was working on a rock project called Silent Pilot. I talked to him about coming in to make a record with me and my partner Nick, and ultimately it took a few years to get them to get in here because they had been doing everything DIY up until that point. And there was one point where Anthony called me. They were down in LA, and they'd just kind of gotten through like a weird situation with some band members, ex-band members, and some other social stuff. And essentially Anthony was like, "I'm ready to make a record. Like let's just do this. Let's make this happen." And then a few months later, they were in here and spent the better part of a year making a full-length record.
Very cool. And I guess this also goes into tying in how is it that you were doing engineering and the producing part?
Oh, okay. So I have been engineering since probably for like 13 years, but only professionally full time for probably the last two and a half. And I engineered every single one of my former band's projects. So I always had that kind of multiple hat thing going on. But for Silent Pilot, um, whenever we work with anybody in the studio, we sort of ask them what their goals are with whatever project they're bringing into us, because it's not really fair to treat everything the exact same way, because somebody might want a record that is something that's largely personal to them, and they want to make sure that it's the best version of what's in here, whereas somebody else might want something that can compete with something that's on like a major label or wants radio play. And they're two very, very different things. And of course, there's, every step of the way in between. But being the producer on this project was a lot of fun, because we got to sort of be the big picture guys. Because I think that oftentimes when you're in a project and when you're just in the trenches with songwriting and all that sort of stuff, you start to lose sight of the whole picture, and you got wrapped up in little details. And it was really great to be able to both be in the trenches, but then also take that step back and be like, okay, well, am I serving the song? Am I, providing the most melodic movement that makes the vocal feel the best that it can? Is the rhythm section working together to accentuate, the rhythmic cadences and the vocals and all that sort of stuff?
Got you. And as a bassist, do you find it in any way challenging to not favor the bass tracks and make them stand out a little bit? Because I can see, and I say this because a lot of times we get recordings where I'm wanting to hear the bassist better, but in the mix, they've just kind of toned it down. And some of the most notorious places, as you talk about jazz band, is with upright players.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, all of a sudden they're cutting loose with a solo, and it sounds like they're underwater or something, and you're kind of going,
they're pretty far away.
I wish I could make out what you're doing here, but it's just kind of whoop, 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 whoop. And I'm like, okay, I want to like this, but I'm having trouble hearing it. So, and I've often thought if the engineer was a bassist, he would have done better at giving us a clear voice there. And I know it's possible because I've heard other upright players be able to have a really nice crystal clear sound, and you're kind of going, okay, obviously somebody's figured it out, but not everybody. So as a bassist, were you fair to everybody else, or did you tend to favor the bass?
So as a bassist, especially in the role of this project, I felt that my role was to essentially make it so that if it was just the bass and the vocal playing, that you felt something really profound. Because a lot of times, if you just have like a vocal, you can get an idea of how the song sounds. Everybody's heard an a cappella vocal, but a lot of times they'll have the reference of the song to know, wow, this feels really, really good. But it's because it's the relationship of that one thing to this other thing. And for me, in this project, it was important to make sure that all of my note choices and any sort of fills that I was doing on the record were for optimal emotional impact, and that's not necessarily in a technical impact type of way.
Gotcha.
My job was very much to not get in the way, but to also have it so that when somebody's listening to the record, that they don't know why they feel the way they do in those moments, but it's largely that relationship of all of these things coming together to make something bigger than just one piece of it.
Absolutely. And I think that certainly hits on a key component where some of the performers, the bassists that we recognize as being iconic, have done exactly that. I mean, look at the work of Beatles music.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, okay, there's a feeling that goes with it. Recently, somebody was telling me that Paul McCartney actually recorded a lot of his lines after the songs were done, so they weren't the driving force along with it, but it was how is he going to do this lyrical adornment and approach that is what stuck with you, kind of in the
Yeah.
back of your head. And so, there's probably no one on the planet that doesn't hear the first few bars of "Come Together" and they're going, "Oh yeah, it's the whole bass thing that did this whole painted the whole picture right from the beginning." Um, so it's interesting to see it taken into account because we do have the possibility of being just a more percussive, less melodic, uh, if the intent also is to make it a dance tune.
Yeah.
That you go, okay, I'm just going to hit the beat so people are stepping in time, and
Yep.
that's as good as it needs to be. Not that that's not important. It's just, again, the intent behind it. Um, Whenever we do talk about basses, I always get into talking a little bit about gear. What are you using? What is giving you your voice?
So the sound of that record is a few things. It was one bass. It is made by Nash Guitars. They are pretty much exclusively what we used on the record, aside to a few things. They're a small maker out of the Pacific Northwest that we've seen make for some bands that we really like. And when we got our hands on them, they were just like, yeah, they have a worn-in vibe to them. They're the vintage modern type of thing. If you're not familiar with them, and so I have a vintage mod. It's a Nash P bass. It's got Lawler pickups, and I believe the strings I was using on it were either DRs. The heavy bottom ones, the ones with I think the 105 or the 110 on the bottom, because I believe we were playing in C sharp, I believe, for a lot of it. And then it was either that or no, yeah, it was the DRs. I recently switched strings to Stadium Elites, which are out of the UK, and I found out about them from a friend who does live sound, who's buddies with the Radiohead front of house, and I was wondering what he uses, so I did my research, and he told me, this thing, and you can only, of course, buy them from the UK, so you have to import them and all that sort of fun stuff. So, but they're extraordinarily balanced. They are pretty much what I exclusively use now, but I use that Nash P bass, and then a few effects. The amp that I was running was an SVT Classic, because a lot of the reference records that they gave us were from Jerry Finn, who did a lot of Blink 182's like seminal records, and did some I believe he did Dookie from Green Day, which is like their launch point, and then a couple of AFI records, but everybody loved that the Mark Hoppus bass tone, so I used an SVT Classic, and then I split that off to an Avalon U5 DI, used the active tone circuit, and cleaned up a little bit of the low end, so I was kind of blending between a DI and an amp. And as far as like inserts, I was using the Origin Effects Cali 76 compressor. They make a new one that is a lot smaller than the one that I use, which is actually this one right here. So it's this giant stomp box. It's essentially an 1176 in a stomp box, and really rounds out the tone really well. Gives you a lot of sustain, but doesn't do the thing that a lot of bass compressors do, that kind of sap the low end from your tone a little bit. And there's a wet dry, which is really, really, really great. So I can compress it a little harder than I would going in if I can blend that knob a little bit. I was using the Aguilar tone hammer for clean tone sculpting, and then for the saturation, because there's some nastier bass sounds on it with overdrive and all that, but it doesn't ever get into like proper distortion I look at it as more of a saturation or an overdrive than a distortion. I was using the Dark Glass Microtubes B7K Ultra. Um, Really like a surgeon's tool for overdrive. Um, Love it to death. I had been a long time Proco Rat user, um, but I always felt that when I was playing with it live, that I would lose a lot of the low end when I would kick it on, and then it would start to get into that complicated signal routing where I would either need to like split my signal or any of that. So I really like what Dark Glass does. And then I think that's it. I don't think I use anything wild like any fuzz or any delays or any of that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's pretty much like the signal chain for the most part.
Nice. Well, it sounds like quite the toolbox.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's really cool.
Very cool. And looking forward, what projects are we looking forward to? What's coming down the pike?
So I just finished an EP for an artist that successfully funded a Kickstarter to do a full-length album with us. So we are actually in the midst of working on a full-length album, and it couldn't be more different from Silent Pilot. It's sort of like a very delicate indie project that is, as of right now, looking to be almost like a companion piece to like a John Hughes film, or like sort of very like the Goonies or something like that. So like not as much proper bass playing, but we did end up investing in a Sub 37 from Moog, which is going to be a lot of fun, and then also getting to use some Juno 106 stuff is going to be a lot of fun as far as like the low bass sounds, and like I really like using a lot of the brass sounds from the Juno 66 106 series as bass sounds, and especially with that like sort of classic vibe of like an 80s film, like those synthesizers are all over the place. So we'll have to expand our toolbox just in a different way. So there's that. Just wrapped an EP for a group of young guys who were on Steve Harvey's Little Big Shots 2 years ago.
Okay.
They played a cover of My Generation and just absolutely slayed. They are extraordinarily talented for their age. They're called WJM. So we just wrapped an EP for them. Working on a couple of projects in Los Angeles that are kind of ranging all over the spectrum as well. Since completing the Silent Pilot record, we did 2 records from Austria, one that was sort of like a black metal-y type thing, and another one that was sort of hardcore, sort of post-hardcore type of stuff. Yeah, we kind of run the gamut. Also a couple of like just straight, pure, really great pop stuff as well. But just getting to work on all this stuff really allows me to be a lot more of a utility player for the low end, which is really, really, really fun. Because I don't really get bored with like all I'm doing is sitting in the studio and doing one genre of music. I get to sort of explore a lot of different options, which is really, really great for me just as an overall musician.
Gotcha. Well, there's always something to be said for that, and certainly on one hand, there are bands that have been playing the same stuff successfully
Absolutely.
for decades. What we were recently on our cover right now is Ricky Phillips with Styx.
Got it.
I mean, the music is phenomenal.
Yeah.
But I could also see more often than not they like to also be dabbling in something else to help kind of balance and kind of keep their sanity, and so it's that diversification, even though you've got something that's steady and working, is very important. And I think if nothing else, also it helps kind of keep your creative juices flowing, so that you're constantly evolving and incorporating kind of new things, even though there are certain things that are working. So if somebody needs to contact for you, and of course we'll talk about Contact for Silent Pilot, but
Yeah.
where's the best place if people want to find out more about what you're doing, or if they want to record with you or need a bassist? You've got.
Pretty much everything is going to be directed to the Canvas.group. In this new age, you can just do websites where it's like 2 words and then whatever. So we have a website, and it's www.thecanvas.group. There's a profile that has a bunch of our recent work on it. Of course, with the amount of work that we have kind of always evolving, we have a lot of upkeep to do. So it's pretty up to date. There's definitely stuff that we've done that is more recent that hasn't been put up yet. There's stuff that we can't release yet, that we can't talk about, that all that sort of stuff. But it ultimately does end up making it up on that website. There is a contact form on there. They can inquire about recording, can inquire about producing, mixing, mastering services. Don't get a whole lot of mastering projects, just because I outsource mastering for the most part. But if somebody does come in and is like, I just want you to do the whole thing, I can absolutely do that. And yeah, that's pretty much where I would say like to go for any of that sort of stuff.
Got you. And with Silent Pilot, I've got silentpilot.com
Yep.
if people want to hear that, and or they can go on facebook.com/silentpilot and find out more
Yep.
about what's going on there. Well, Rob, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. It's always interesting to get the different perspective, and more so when you're wearing different hats and doing other things in addition to bass. So I think that may also open some other bassists' eyes and go, hey, maybe I should help engineer something or produce something,
Yeah.
kind of step outside of it. So,
A lot of fun. Thank you for having me, Raul.
oh, our pleasure, folks. You've seen it here. Rob Marshall coming to you live on Bass Musician Magazine.